Welcome to California Edition, coming to you from Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. We're inside the Cannon House office building. We are joined by Juan Vargas. He is a member of the U.S. Congress representing San Diego and Imperial counties, one of the newest members of the U.S. Congress. How's your new job, man?
I love it.
Tell me why.
Well, it's an honor. I mean, it's an honor to be here. You know, you walk around the Capitol late at night after a meeting, and you walk past where Abraham Lincoln was. You know, Abraham Lincoln was in the Congress. There's a little plaque there where his desk used to be. So, I mean, that's what an honor that is.
About maybe 30 years ago, you were a student at Harvard Law. Another gentleman was a student. His name was Barack Obama. You played basketball with Mr. Obama. Would you have ever thought that Mr. Obama would be in the White House and you'd be in Congress when you were on the court shooting some hoops?
No, I would have treated him better.
Exactly, exactly.
No, I never thought that. You know, he was a very judicious guy.
He was.
We always thought he was going to be a judge.
Interesting.
You know, very smart guy.
He still could
reserved.
be.
Yeah, he still
could.
That's
He's
right.
young enough. He's young enough.
That's a good point.
Well, I was going to say. So you're enjoying your job. You're doing the people's work. And especially in San Diego and Imperial counties, the people's work is focused upon what we know as immigration reform.
That's right.
And I want to get a sense from you, what are your constituents saying to you all the way across the California-Mexico border? Because as you had told me, you represent from one side of California to the other.
That's right.
The entire Mexican border.
That's right. You know, interestingly, very unanimously, they're saying we need comprehensive immigration reform. But the saddest issue really has been the military. You know, a lot of people don't understand this, but there's a lot of military, especially wives, who are undocumented. We had a Marine come up and testify and basically say this. You know, I've done two tours of duty in Iraq. I'm going back to Afghanistan. The only thing I fear, and not death, I don't fear about death. That's what Marines do. We die. He says pretty starkly. Because the only thing I'm afraid of is they may deport my wife when I'm gone. Then what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to help her when I'm in Afghanistan? They deport my wife to Mexico. And I have two young daughters with her, my wife. What am I supposed to do for my daughters?
So what do you say, as you're looking into their eyes, what do you say to them? You're a new member, you're working hard, but this is a very divisive issue. What do you say?
Well, this young man, I'll never forget what he says. He goes, I want you to think about me every day. And I said, you know, how can I not? I mean, you may not even come back, but how can I not think about you? You know, and I thought I thought that he was probably wrong, that he could in fact legalize his wife. She would have to leave the country for 10 years under the current law before she could come back. And he says, how am I supposed to live like that? So I'm supposed to take my wife then to the border, tell her to go to Mexico for 10 years, and then come back. Who's going to take care of my kids? And how can I do that to the woman I love? I mean, it's just wrong. We've got to change the law.
Well, there's no doubt that many Californians, Democrats and Republicans, would agree with you. The challenge becomes, when you look at the Republican caucus, it's filled with many members who don't represent gentlemen like you suggest, who don't have ag interests in their district. What do you say to those Republican members as they're considering this issue and their constituents are saying no amnesty?
I tell them this, remember Ronald Reagan? And remember your own faith, your own churches, because the churches have been here now in force. Catholic churches over here, but now we have all these Protestant churches, evangelical churches saying, you've got to do this. You absolutely have to do this. It's the right thing to do. It's in the Bible. Our constituents now are these people that we've evangelized, and they are now, you know, our parishioners. You've got to help out on this thing. So I have to tell you, I think a lot of the people here, Republicans, everyone, they're opening up their hearts for change.
We hear the faith community in support of reform. We hear labor in support of reform. We hear business interests in support of reform. It seems like it's a perfect trifecta, or trinity, if I can use that cliche. But still, it's not easy.
It's not easy, but it's going to happen. And the reason it's going to happen is because you do have the churches involved, you do have businesses involved, and people are changing their hearts about this. They're saying, okay, they did something wrong, but it wasn't a criminal act. I mean, it wasn't what we call malum per se.
I'm a lawyer. I know what you're saying.
Malum per se, not in itself.
For our viewers on HLN, we thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. At the border.
Yeah.
In San Diego, in Imperial County, we often see children being brought in, not by their parents, but by pimps.
Right.
I know recently Don Knabe, a supervisor from Los Angeles County, has been behind this issue. He testified before the Foreign Affairs Committee. You're a member of that committee.
Yes.
Congressman Alan Lowenthal is a member of that committee. You are focused on this issue as well. Hazel's Law is something that you've been supporting.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, unfortunately, in the media and in other places, they've glorified these pimps. These pimps are traffickers who are abusing these children. And unfortunately, the law right now, it is the federal law, it's very hard to prosecute them because the law says you have to prove that this pimp knew that this young girl was a girl. In other words, that she was under 18. And so it's very hard to prove. And plus, you have this girl who's been victimized now. It's very hard for her to go in front of a jury and face her accuser and face the other lawyer. So oftentimes, they don't prosecute them. Instead, they give them a little slap on the hand, and the pimp oftentimes is even waiting for the girl out there waiting for her when she gets out because she's going to get up on some prostitution charges.
Is this an issue that can be federalized? Because
Yes.
when you think about crime, it tends to be a state issue.
Right. This is already federalized. In other words, we already have a federal law, but the federal law says you have to prove that the pimp knew that she was a minor. So my law says
Please.
you don't have to prove that he knew. All you have to prove is that she was under 18. So the government has to prove that he's a pimp trafficking this girl and that the girl is under 18. That's all we have to prove.
Is it relevant if the girl is international or domestic?
It doesn't matter for the law. All that matters is that this girl is in the United States and that this guy's a pimp and he's trafficked her for sex money and that now we can go after him. If we can prove that, we don't have to prove that he knew that she was a child.
And I want to ask about that distinction between international and domestic because I think there's a perception out there that most of these girls are international. They've been imported into the country. That doesn't make it any more ugly. But what we do know is that's not really the case. Many of these girls are domestic. They're runaways. They're citizens.
That's right.
Again, ugly regardless. But how do we protect these American citizens and these international young women?
Yeah, the law is named after Hazel.
Tell us about that.
Hazel was born in San Diego, in El Cajon. She was raised in San Diego. I mean, her parents are here, her family's here. And, she was taken by this pimp, and she was prostituted and beat up. She believes that she would have been killed if she wasn't able to escape. Finally, she was able to escape. And so now, and she was brave enough and she had her wits about her to stand in court, and we were able to prosecute this guy for 30 years. He's going to be in prison now for 30 years.
Were you the attorney?
No,
No, okay.
but I was involved in this
I
case
see.
now through their attorney.
I see.
In other words, her attorney, her prosecuting attorney is the one that's brought the law
I
forward.
see.
Says, Juan, you got to change the law. This is wrong.
So how's Hazel doing? Do you know?
Yeah.
Tell us about her.
She's tough. She's
Is
great.
she?
Oh, absolutely. She's a survivor.
Right.
She is a survivor. She's not a victim. She's a survivor. She's a motorcycle mechanic now. She's going to do all right, but she's been through hell.
Has the federal government, either through Hazel's Law or otherwise, set up programs to help these young women once they escape? Or is that a state issue, a county issue?
I think it's an issue for everybody. And no, we do not have good programs, unfortunately, but we're working on that. As you mentioned, Supervisor Knabe up in
Right.
Los Angeles is working very hard on this, as are other legislators. So we have to work with them to say, okay, let's not treat these girls as prostitutes and throw them in jail. Instead, let's treat them for what they are, victims, and try to figure out how do we help them. Let's go after the perpetrators. Let's go after the pimps. And let's not glorify these guys. These guys are punks. They're no good. These are the guys that ought to be in jail.
I want to ask you, though, you left Sacramento as part of a majority party. You come to Washington as part of a minority party. And while a bill like this would seem to be common sense, you do have to get through the majority.
Sure.
Have you spoken with the majority party about this bill? Do you have Republican co-sponsors?
Absolutely.
We do.
In fact, I haven't heard of anyone yet, and I've talked to a lot of people who say, well, that's a bad idea. Everyone said just the opposite. God, I wish I would have known, I would have done something earlier, but everyone's aboard. So I believe that this thing is going to go through, and I think we're going to change the law.
And
we have to do it.
Talk to me about being in the minority. It's very different, especially Sacramento, where Democrats had really significant majorities. Now they have 2/3, but be that as it may.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's kind of interesting because I've always gotten along with Republicans.
I
I
see.
always say some of my best brothers and sisters literally are Republicans.
Literally?
Literally.
Okay.
So I get along with Republicans. We disagree on some things, but on a lot of things we agree. We love California. When we were in California, we love America now that it's the United States. And you know what? We can find these commonalities. Let's find the commonalities. Let's work together.
His name is Juan Vargas. He is a member of the United States Congress representing significant portions of San Diego and Imperial counties. My name is Brad Pomerance. You are watching California Edition.
What percentage of confirmed sex trafficking victims in the United States have been identified as American citizens? According to the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics, from June 2008 to July 2010, 4/5 of victims in confirmed sex trafficking cases were identified as U.S. citizens.
It's California edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are coming to you from the Cannon House office building in Washington, D.C. And look who we found. Los Angeles County Supervisor Don Knabe. What a tremendous treat and coincidence that you are here while we are here. Why is a supervisor from LA County here in the Capitol?
Well, first of all, I mean, it's one of our annual trips that we come back for on an annual basis, but obviously we have some very significant issues.
Right.
We've talked in your show before about these, but particularly like the Affordable Care Act, our Medicaid waiver, our Children and Family Services issues, probation. As you know.
Let's talk about one issue, if I may. I was recently speaking with Alan Lowenthal, member of the United States Congress, and from our interview, he immediately ran to a committee because you were testifying, and he wanted to be there to support your efforts to combat human trafficking, an issue that you have taken on for literally decades.
Well, I think it's an issue that obviously the hearings, it wound up lasting 2.5 hours,
Wow.
but it really covered not only the child trafficking, which we're trying to deal with there in LA County, but also as employer trafficking. And so they had myself and 2 other testifiers from the private sector. And the issue for us, obviously, is we need a national program of some sort. We're willing to be sort of the model for it right now, but what's transpired is that these young girls, you can't tell me that they choose that way of life.
No.
When you're 12 years old, you don't choose to be a prostitute. And so it's a very significant issue, not just in LA County, but throughout the nation. And I think what was really interesting is how many of the members really had no idea the impact or the size or the scope of the problem throughout the country.
And what's so interesting is there's this perception or presumption that these young girls are international. Somehow they've been brought into the country. But you've taught me that's not the case.
Oh, and I was taught too by I call my superwomen from the probation
Right.
department that, it's always one of those issues. It's a very uncomfortable issue to talk about, number one. Number two, you think it's from a third world country like in Thailand or someplace else. I mean, the congresswoman from Hawaii, she just had 400 Thailand young ladies in a container come into the, that kind of, so you think of it in those terms. You don't think of these, pimps in your backyard. Now, some of it's organized, some of it's independent, but now we're finding the gangs are getting involved in it because gangs have national connections as well as international connections. They can sell these young ladies 6-8 times a night instead of just one drug deal or one gun deal. So it's a very profitable
and these
center.
young ladies may be and likely are Americans.
Absolutely.
Californians.
They're not, I mean, obviously there is foreign issues because of our access to the borders and the ports. It is an issue, but they're also very domestic. They're runaways.
So what are you hoping the federal government can do?
Well, I think what we're hoping for is, on the federal level, is a collaboration to give it more of a national significance, to really let these people know that we know what they're doing, and we're going to come get you, and we're going to make sure that you pay the price, and we're going to protect these young ladies at almost any cost. We got the money from the Foreign Affairs Committee as it relates to our collaborative courtroom, where we bring these girls in, dedicated courtroom to them, so that their pimp's not waiting for them out in the parking lot. We have law enforcement, we have health services, mental health services, we have total wraparound, and housing. The biggest gap that we're missing right now is the housing piece, because what's happening in many cases, we have to put them into the juvenile hall system to protect them. I mean, these girls have tattoos. They're identified by their pimp. And I testified today that, one survivor told us that there was a group of girls that were forced to go to the desert outside of Los Angeles and watch one of their own get murdered and burnt to death.
I'm rendered speechless.
Yeah.
And you've been working to combat this for quite some time. We thank you for speaking to the Foreign Affairs Committee today about child trafficking. When we come back, I want to talk more about, you mentioned employer trafficking, and I'm wondering if there's an immigration element there. I bet there is. We're speaking with Don Knabe, member of the Board of Supervisors in Los Angeles County. For our viewers on HLN, thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, sir, you mentioned that there is something known as employer trafficking. I presume
It's an issue that most people don't know about. It's really an accountability issue because it's not like the employer, but they're not being held accountable. It's their subcontractors, particularly the larger ones, and what's happening in foreign subcontractors. And so Apple was one of the first to get on the forefront of this issue to make their subcontractors liable for the kinds of people they're hiring. And
so is it trafficking foreign nationals into this country?
Some of it is. Some of it's also trafficking in the issue at the other end of the food supply chain, because they may be using kids okay? They may be using kids of a very young age to make things and to
In
pay
our
them.
borders?
Hopefully not in our borders,
Right.
but it's transpired, particularly in the garment industry, it's happened.
Oh,
But we've got a
sure.
much better handle on it. But it's really the supply chain from the main manufacturers as they go overseas. And so it's a chain that runs from overseas right into our country, and the kinds of products that are being made and who's making them and how much, what kind of a standard of living do they have? Do they have a job? Do they have health care? Or are they just like child
And
workers?
let's talk about health care. As we know, the Affordable Care Act is upon us. There's a lot of nervousness about it. Los Angeles County, probably the largest county in the country. What are you hearing from your constituents about the upcoming implementation of
That's
the
a great
Affordable Care
question,
Act?
Matt, because I'm really not hearing enough. I don't
Interesting.
think anyone, they talk about it, and as I tell people, and I've said to you before, whether you're for it or against it, we have to be ready.
It's here.
It's here. I don't think anyone realizes what happens on January 1st, 2014. Their doctor-patient relationship, the existing program that they have, if they're not able to keep it, if they have to buy insurance to an exchange, the outrageous prices that are being charged. Is mental health
But
covered? Is it not?
The healthcare exchanges presumably are supposed to decrease the rates for those that don't have the bargaining power.
It is, but it's a very expensive rate. I mean, the preliminary ones. But again, here we are. We're sitting here in Washington, D.C.
Right.
The program starts January 1st, and there's all these unknown issues. So what we're trying to do is say, look, we know what we do and what we have to do and required by law. Why don't you let us give some input? So we are making sure that the members understand what may transpire as it relates to a public health care system, particularly the second largest in the country in LA
Right.
County, and the impact on patients.
So I must ask you, California is one of the states that is accepting the Medicaid expansion. And so on the one end, that's a net positive because those people will receive health care, but that means that a public health care system like Los Angeles County will see a huge influx of patients. Is that accurate?
It is, and it's the good side of that is we're going to see an influx of patients. The other side of it is we have to be ready. I mean, we can't continue to be all things to all people. We're going to have to create centers of excellence. We're going to have to be a competitor. Otherwise, you've heard me say this before, we have the largest uninsured population in America. What people don't understand, though, at the end of the day, when this program goes into effect, we'll still have over 1 million uninsured in Los Angeles County.
At the same time, one of the biggest fears of the medical community is that in California, especially in the inland area, not so much in LA County, we have a dearth of primary care physicians. So the goal of the Affordable Care Act is to get people to primary care so they don't wind up in the ER. What do we do on that issue if we don't have enough primary care?
Obviously, the best thing to do, if they can do it, and I'm not sure that we can do it right away under the Affordable Care Act, is to expand the medical facility kinds of programs, the clinic
Right.
versus going to an ER, even if it means building clinics right next door to the ER. So somebody walks into the ER and says, I got a head cold. Well, you don't belong here, you belong next door.
Urgent care, as they're known today.
Absolutely.
But again, we are, 6-7 months out. This is coming down the pike. I mean, I will say this, Governor Schwarzenegger, Governor Brown, they anticipated it. They've been trying to put the exchanges in place. They've been looking towards the Medicaid expansion. But like you said, LA County, 10 million people. California, 37 million people. Are we ahead of the game?
I can only speak for us, and I think we're ahead of the game in Los Angeles County because we've been working on this a long time. And, even though there's not a member of Congress that probably read all 2,400 pages of the Affordable Care Act, we have people that did.
Sure.
And so we're trying to get out ahead, constant conversation, bringing people back here inside the bowels of the system to say, look, at this, what needs to be done. What does this mean? And so we're trying to plan for it. The biggest thing that we're going is a culture change in our system where
Right.
we have to be a competitor.
And we need to
Because
educate.
when they're forced to come to us and they have insurance, we want to make sure they stay with us.
I know Covered California is running advertisements. They're entering into product placement with sitcoms. Is LA County doing the same?
We will at some point. I mean, we have people working on a marketing program because we're going to
Okay.
have to market.
No doubt.
I mean, we're going to have to be a competitor.
He's Don Knabe, member of the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors. My name is Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition.
Currently, how many Americans receive their health care through Medicaid, known as Medi-Cal in California? 25 million, 45 million, 60 million, or 70 million? Launched in 1965, Medicaid currently provides health care services to 60 million Americans.
We are coming to you from the nation's capital. My name is Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Suzanne Bonamici. She is a member of the United States Congress representing the beautiful state of Oregon. She is a relatively new member, been in Congress just over a year. I want to thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
How's your new job?
Oh, it's been great. The scope of issues is incredible. It's an awesome responsibility, and I have a great district.
Tell us about it.
It's a very
Please.
It's a very diverse district. It's the northwest part of the state of Oregon.
Yeah, life's tough in paradise.
It's
Life's
wonderful.
tough,
So
right.
it includes part of the beautiful Oregon coast.
Right.
It goes all the way into the northwest part of Portland. Includes Yamhill County, where we have some great vineyards and wineries, and
Life's tough
that's
in
right.
paradise.
Columbia County, which is an absolutely beautiful river county along the Columbia River, Astoria, and then Washington County, which is really the economic hub of the state.
And let's talk about your district,
Sure.
because I know that since you've joined the Congress, you have been returning home, long flights, but to talk to your constituents.
Absolutely.
What are they saying to you? What are their hopes for your tenure?
Thanks,
please.
yes. Well, I've done several rounds of town hall
Right.
meetings. I just finished 8 different town hall meetings around the district. Just had last week 100 people show up down in Yamhill
Wow.
County. And I have to tell you that people really want us to work together and get things done. It's kind of a common theme. I'm also hearing people very concerned about these across-the-board cuts that are coming from what's called sequestration, which I did not support.
Right. It's interesting you say that, because I've always had the sense, and it's just one person's perception, that the nation really wasn't focused on sequestration, other than when the FAA furloughed the air traffic controllers, that because we weren't feeling the pain, that there wasn't a push to fix the sequester. But your constituents are.
They are, and for a long time they weren't, because I think, frankly, that people didn't think it was going to go into effect. They had heard that this was not going to happen. These across-the-board cuts were put into the Budget Control Act, which
Right.
happened before my time in
Right.
Congress, as an incentive to force the Congress to work together and find reasonable, logical ways to cut spending, not across the board. They were designed to be so bad that they never would go into effect,
Yet
and then here they are.
They are.
So we're hearing about them. You mentioned the FAA. We're
Right.
also hearing about them in many other areas as well. Things like education, where Head Start, Title I that helps low-income schools, medical research.
Right, and you're on the Education Committee,
Yes.
so I know it's important to you that those issues be
very
addressed. But yet, when the air traffic controllers were furloughed, that was fixed like that. The meat inspectors, fixed like that. But the children who need Head Start, they don't necessarily have a voice. Meals on Wheels for seniors, they don't have a voice, so we don't see those fixes.
I certainly would vote for, in fact, I've signed on to legislation to repeal the entire sequestration. We should be sitting down and working together to find places where we can cut. I have to say we've done quite a lot of cutting already in the Budget Control Act. Right now we're seeing some great signs that our economy is rebuilding. Now we need to be investing. We need to be making those investments in Head Start, keeping kids in school, investing in infrastructure, rebuilding our roads and bridges. That helps get people back to work and build the economy.
But what's so interesting is, when you think about the two political parties, the Democratic Party will speak as you're speaking. You're a Democrat. The Republican Party sees it completely differently. They feel as if the most important thing is to bring down the debt, bring down the deficit. Now's not the time to increase infrastructure spending.
Well, there are obviously significant differences among some of the members about the role of government and where we should be spending. But if you look at history and where investment has paid off, and look at what's happening now with the signs of rebuilding our economy, now is the time
Let's
to be
talk more
investing.
about it. For our viewers on HLN, thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. But Congresswoman, I do want to continue this conversation about the role of government, because it is so interesting that when you look at Washington, there really is a philosophical difference. The parties really see government differently. They see the role of government differently. And so when you have the parties coming at a situation with such divergent views, it's as if they're talking past each other.
Well, let's talk about individual members rather than just
Fair
that
enough.
party and
That's
this party, because
perfect.
everyone has different viewpoints. I have no doubt that everyone is here believing that they're doing the right thing. I'm always looking for ways where we can find common ground, and I'll give you an example.
Please.
I have a couple of pieces of legislation, bipartisan. These are not partisan issues. The tsunami after the Japanese
Sure.
earthquake and the debris washing up onto our shore. So I have broad bipartisan support for legislation to help with that cleanup. You know, of course, the coastal members are interested. Doesn't matter if people are Democrats or Republicans. And that's what I'm hearing when I'm home in the district. Find places where you agree. And that's what I'm striving to do. That's what my constituents want. That's the way we get things done.
Well, let me ask you, if I may, with your permission, about immigration reform
Sure.
as an example.
Absolutely.
I'm not clear if your district is one where immigration is a significant issue.
It's a very
It
significant
is.
issue, but on many levels. I have a lot of high-tech industry in my district, businesses that want the immigration reform because they want to keep highly skilled workers here. And then I have agriculture and a
The wine
nursery
industry, right.
and thriving nursery industry. They need a workforce. So it's really coming from a lot of different areas. Also the constituent work that we do in my office. We have constituents calling us with, any sort of federal issue like Medicare, Social Security, and we help them. But the immigration cases, I have to tell you, there's some real humanitarian reasons for doing immigration reform as well.
And I've heard that, interestingly, from Democrats and Republicans.
Right.
And we know in the Senate there appears to be a bipartisan effort
Yes.
to move comprehensive immigration reform forward.
Right.
In the House, it's not clear if the effort is comprehensive. What's
There's
your
some
sense?
discussions. I'm somewhat optimistic about
Really?
this. Yes, because there is the bipartisan group in the Senate. There have been bipartisan discussions here in the House. I know that they're a little farther along in the Senate because they're having their hearings. They're starting to consider amendments. But this is something that we should be able to do, and it would be good for our country.
When your constituents call you or you see them at the town
Right,
halls,
right.
are they talking about the Affordable Care Act, healthcare
Somewhat.
reform?
They're talking about it somewhat, but I have to say that in Oregon, we are way ahead in terms of setting up our insurance exchanges in healthcare transformation, expanding access to affordable healthcare. There's some legislation we passed in the state, at the state level, to get ready for that, and I've
Yes.
toured.
And Oregon has accepted
Yes.
the Medicaid expansion
Oh,
as an
absolutely.
example.
And when I've toured these coordinated care organizations, it makes so much sense to have a coordinated care.
What about the businesses?
Mm-hmm.
There's a floor and a ceiling in terms of how a business needs to cover its employees. If it's above 50, there's an obligation. If it's below 50, there isn't. They may be able to go to an exchange.
Right.
There's a question about part-time workers. If they hit 30 hours,
right.
we hear rumors that now employers are hiring people for 29 hours.
Right. We're hearing all those things.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say that healthcare in our country is very complex, and the Affordable Care Act is designed to make healthcare more accessible and more affordable. The implementation is going to take some work, obviously, and we'll be looking for places if we need to do some changes to make it further those goals of accessible, affordable healthcare.
And what's so interesting to me about what's happening with the healthcare reform debate is that when the Supreme Court ordered that the federal government could not demand a Medicare expansion, a Medicaid expansion, some states said, we're still going to take it. Other states will never consider taking it. And so in Oregon, if you happen to be indigent or need access to healthcare, you'll get it. If you're in Tennessee, you won't.
I have to say that I think that the constituents in those states will speak up, because if they see that there's an opportunity to get health care, I think that they'll be raising their voices. So my constituents, they care a lot about health care, but they also care a lot about education. It's something that keeps
Right.
coming up, and our schools, our state budget has been struggling with funding for education.
But have you been intrigued by kind of a left coast view? I mean, I'm from California, you're from Oregon. We see the world one way, and the rest of the country may see it differently.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Okay, her name is Suzanne Bonamici. She is a member of the United States Congress from the beautiful state of Oregon. Thank you so much for joining us from Washington, D.C.